You're standing in a crowded room. Maybe it's a party. Maybe it's a coffee shop. Maybe it's one of those forgettable Tuesday evenings where nothing remarkable was supposed to happen. The noise around you is the usual kind. Conversations overlapping, the clatter of cups, someone laughing too loudly near the door. You're present, but not fully. Your mind is doing that thing it does in social situations, where it's half engaged and half somewhere else entirely, rehearsing what you need to do tomorrow or replaying something that was said to you 3 days ago. And then it happens. Across the room, through the noise, through the blur of faces and movement, someone looks at you. Not a passing glance. Not the kind of look that skims the surface of a face and moves on. This is a look that lands. It settles. And in that fraction of a second, something happens that is genuinely difficult to explain. Something that no amount of modern sophistication or scientific vocabulary quite captures in full. Time slows down, not metaphorically, not in the lazy, poetic way we use that phrase to describe beautiful sunsets or memorable meals, in a way that you can almost feel in your body. The room doesn't disappear exactly, but it recedes. The noise becomes distant. Your heartbeat, which a moment ago was doing its quiet, unremarkable job, suddenly makes itself known. There's a warmth in your chest, a kind of electricity in the air between you and this stranger, or this person you've known for years but have never quite seen like this before. You hold the gaze for what feels like several seconds, then one of you looks away. And just like that, ordinary time resumes. What just happened? If you've ever experienced that moment, and most of us have, at least once, you've probably filed it away under the category of things that feel mysterious and deeply human. Things that science might poke at, but could never fully explain. Things that belong more to poetry than to psychology. But here's what's fascinating. Science has actually been poking at this exact phenomenon for decades. Neuroscientists, psychologists, evolutionary biologists, relationship researchers, they have all turned their instruments toward that simple, ancient act of meeting someone's gaze and holding it. And what they've found is extraordinary. That feeling isn't an illusion. It isn't a romantic fantasy. It isn't your brain playing tricks on you in a moment of social vulnerability. That feeling is real. It has a neurological basis, an evolutionary history, a psychological architecture, and a physiological signature. And understanding all of that, understanding why eye contact feels the way it does, doesn't make it less magical. If anything, it makes it more so. Because the truth is, when two people lock eyes and time seems to stop, they are participating in something that goes deeper than any spoken language. They are engaging in a form of communication that predates words by millions of years. They are activating systems in each other's brains that are wired at the most fundamental level to evaluate one of the most important questions a social animal can ask. Are you safe? Are you significant? Are you someone who matters to me? Today we are going to go deep on all of it. We're going to explore the neuroscience of what happens inside your brain during intense eye contact. We're going to look at the psychology of attraction and why the eyes are so central to it. We're going to talk about the evolutionary reasons that sustained eye contact carries such enormous emotional weight. We're going to examine the social rules around eye contact, why we feel compelled to look away, and what happens when we choose not to. We're going to look at real research, including some of the most fascinating and surprising studies ever conducted on human gaze, and we're going to draw it all together into a picture that is, I think, genuinely beautiful. By the end of this, you will understand that moment. You'll understand why it feels the way it does. You'll understand what your nervous system was doing, what your brain was computing, what ancient parts of your evolutionary inheritance were waking up and paying attention. And you will never look someone in the eyes the same way again. Let's begin. The biology of the gaze, your brain on eye contact. The moment of contact, what fires first? Let's start at the very beginning, the neurological beginning. The moment someone's gaze meets yours, and this happens so fast it is almost incomprehensible, your brain begins processing that information through multiple pathways simultaneously. This isn't a slow, deliberate process. It isn't something you consciously initiate. It happens beneath the level of awareness, in structures that were ancient long before the parts of your brain responsible for language and reasoning came online. The first thing that activates is a region of your brain called the superior temporal sulcus, or STS. This is a groove in the temporal lobe of your brain, and it is extraordinarily sensitive to one specific thing: the direction of other people's eyes. Think about how remarkable that is. You have a dedicated region of your brain, a specialized piece of neural real estate that is specifically tuned to the direction of other people's gaze, not their facial expression in general, not their body language in general, but specifically where their eyes are pointing. The superior temporal sulcus can detect changes in gaze direction to within a degree or two of accuracy. It responds more strongly when someone looks at you than when someone looks slightly away from you. And it fires in a qualitatively different way when that gaze is direct, when eyes meet eyes, than at any other time. This happens within milliseconds. Long before you consciously register that someone is looking at you, your STS has already logged it and begun sending signals to the rest of your brain. Simultaneously, the amygdala, that almond-shaped structure deep in your brain that is most famously associated with fear and emotional processing, lights up. The amygdala is your brain's alarm system, its emotional barometer, its rapid evaluator of social and environmental significance. And direct eye contact is one of the most potent activators of the amygdala there is. Research using functional MRI, brain imaging technology that tracks blood flow as a proxy for neural activity, has consistently shown that the amygdala responds significantly more to a face looking directly at you than to a face looking away. And this response happens so quickly that scientists believe it bypasses the cortex, the thinking part of your brain, entirely at first. It goes straight through a subcortical pathway, sometimes called the low road, that evolved specifically to allow rapid processing of socially critical information. In other words, your brain decides that direct eye contact is significant before your conscious mind has even had a chance to form a thought about it. This is important because it means that the feeling you get when someone holds your gaze, that immediate gut-level sense that something just happened, is not a cultural construct. It's not a learned response. It's not you being overly sensitive or romantic or dramatic. It is your nervous system doing exactly what it was built to do, responding to one of the most biologically meaningful signals one human being can send to another. The pupil signal. Your eyes are broadcasting without your permission. Here's something that should genuinely astonish you. When you find someone attractive, or when you are engaged in intimate, sustained eye contact with someone, your pupils dilate. They get bigger. And this is something you cannot consciously control. It happens automatically, driven by your autonomic nervous system, which is the part of your nervous system that runs things like heartbeat, digestion, breathing, and arousal, without asking your permission first. But here's the truly extraordinary part. Other people respond to this signal. Studies have shown that people rate photographs of faces with dilated pupils as more attractive, more interesting, and more emotionally engaging than identical photographs where the pupils have been artificially constricted. And remarkably, in many of these studies, the participants had no conscious awareness of the pupils at all. They couldn't explain why one face seemed more appealing than another. They just felt it. This is an ancient communication system, before language, before facial expressions that we consciously craft and manage, before any form of deliberate social performance. Pupil dilation has been sending signals between humans and between many other animals for an extraordinarily long time. When someone looks at you and their pupils dilate, their eyes are broadcasting. You are interesting to me. You are significant to me. My body is responding to you. And your brain, on some level beneath conscious thought, is reading that signal. This creates one of the most intimate feedback loops in human social experience. You hold someone's gaze. Your brain activates. Your autonomic nervous system responds. Your pupils dilate. They see this, not consciously, but neurologically. And their brain activates in turn. Their pupils dilate. You see this. Your brain responds, back and forth, in a wordless conversation that is happening faster than either of you can think. Is it any wonder that sustained eye contact feels electric? Oxytocin, the chemistry of connection. You've probably heard of oxytocin. It's sometimes called the bonding hormone, or the love hormone, or the trust hormone. And while these nicknames are oversimplifications that drive neuroscientists a little crazy, they're not entirely wrong either. Oxytocin is a neuropeptide, a small protein that acts as both a hormone and a neurotransmitter that plays a crucial role in social bonding, trust, maternal behavior, romantic attachment, and a wide range of prosocial behaviors. It is released during physical touch, during childbirth, during breastfeeding, during orgasm, during moments of deep emotional intimacy, and it is released during prolonged eye contact. Studies have shown that sustained mutual gaze increases oxytocin levels in both people experiencing it. And this matters enormously because oxytocin doesn't just make you feel good, it changes how you process social information. It increases your trust in the person you're interacting with. It makes you more attuned to their emotional states. It deepens the sense of connection you feel with them. Oxytocin also suppresses the amygdala's threat response. Remember how we said the amygdala fires in response to direct eye contact? Well, one of the things that modulates that response, that keeps it from becoming overwhelming or anxiety-inducing, is oxytocin. As the interaction continues, as the gaze is held and the connection deepens, oxytocin rises and begins to reframe what the amygdala is experiencing. Instead of threat, the signal starts to become bond. This is, in a very real sense, the neurochemical story of falling in love, or more accurately, of falling into connection. The eyes meet. The amygdala fires in alarm. Who is this? What does this mean? The brain evaluates rapidly. If the signal is positive, if the face is open, the expression is warm, the gaze is sustained, oxytocin starts to flow. The alarm softens into attention. Attention becomes interest. Interest held long enough becomes connection. All of this happening in the span of seconds. All of it beginning with eye contact. Dopamine and the reward of being seen. Alongside oxytocin, the brain's dopaminergic system is also involved in the experience of meaningful eye contact, particularly in the context of attraction. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter most associated with reward, motivation, anticipation, and pleasure. It's the chemical that makes you want things, not just enjoy them, but want them, seek them, pursue them. The dopamine system is, in a sense, what gives life its forward momentum. When you experience something rewarding, when you eat something delicious, when you achieve something difficult, when you hear music that moves you, when you receive a compliment that lands, your brain releases dopamine, and you feel good, and you want more of it. Eye contact, particularly with someone you find attractive or emotionally significant, activates the dopaminergic reward system. Being seen by someone who matters triggers a dopamine response. And this is not merely metaphorical, it is literal. Your brain treats the sustained gaze of a significant other as a reward. It registers it in the same neural territory that registers food when you're hungry, success when you're striving, beauty when you're seeking it. And this means that mutual eye contact creates something almost like a reward loop. Each moment that the gaze holds, each moment that you remain in the field of someone's full visual attention, Your brain is releasing small pulses of reward signal. You feel drawn in, you feel elevated, you feel in that specific and peculiar way, alive. This is why eye contact with someone you're attracted to feels addictive. It literally is, in the neurochemical sense. Your brain is doing to you roughly what it does with other powerful rewards, making you want more, creating an association between the source of the reward and positive feeling, inclining you toward approach rather than avoidance. The next time you find yourself unable to look away from someone, or unable to stop thinking about the moment when they looked at you, remember, your dopamine system is not being dramatic. It is responding to exactly the kind of social signal it was designed to respond to. The evolutionary story. Why eyes matter so much. The most exposed eyes in the animal kingdom. Here is a fact that most people find surprising when they first encounter it. Humans are the only primates, and in fact the only animals on Earth, with visible sclera. The sclera is the white part of the eye. In almost every other animal, the sclera is dark, the same color as the iris or close to it, so that the direction of gaze is very difficult to determine just by looking at the eye. This is thought to be an adaptive feature. In many environments, advertising where you're looking is a disadvantage. Predators don't want prey to know they've been spotted. Prey don't want predators to know where they're fleeing. Humans, uniquely, have white sclera that stands in stark contrast to the colored iris and the dark pupil. This means that the direction of a human gaze is immediately, obviously, unmistakably readable to any observer. You can tell from significant distances exactly where someone is looking. Why would evolution produce this? Why would natural selection favor a design that makes our gaze so transparent, so easily readable, so thoroughly exposed? The leading hypothesis, sometimes called the cooperative eye hypothesis, is that visible sclera evolved because humans are intensely social animals who needed to coordinate attention with each other. In a species that hunts together, raises children communally, makes collective decisions, and navigates complex social hierarchies, the ability to rapidly and accurately read where other group members are directing their attention is enormously valuable. If I'm hunting with you and I need to know that you've spotted the prey over there to the left, it helps if I can read your eye direction from several meters away without you needing to gesture or make noise. If we're raising children together and I need to know that you've seen the danger approaching, visible gaze direction is faster than any other signal. But here's where it gets particularly interesting for our purposes today. The very thing that made human gaze readable for coordination purposes, the exposed, high-contrast eye design, also made direct eye contact into a uniquely powerful and uniquely loaded signal. Because if my gaze is readable from a distance, and you can see exactly where I'm looking, then when I look at you, directly, deliberately sustained, you know it without any ambiguity. You know that my entire visual attention is directed at you. There's no uncertainty, no wondering if I'm looking at the person behind you or past you at the horizon. I am looking at you. And that is, evolutionarily speaking, a very significant thing to signal. The primal language of dominance and submission. In virtually every social species that communicates through gaze, sustained direct eye contact has a primary meaning. It signals dominance, challenge, or competitive intent. Watch two dogs meeting for the first time. The dominant one will hold a steady, direct stare. The submissive one will look away. In wolves, in great apes, in many bird species, in cats, in fish, across the animal kingdom, who holds the gaze and who looks away is a fundamental communication about social status and competitive relationship. Humans inherited this system. When two strangers lock eyes in a competitive or ambiguous context, there is often a moment of almost palpable tension, a dominance negotiation happening at the level of pure instinct. Who will look away first? In many social contexts, looking away first signals submission, discomfort, or lower social status. Holding the gaze signals confidence, dominance, or competitive intent. You can see this playing out in all kinds of human social situations. The job interview where you're trying to project confidence. The argument where looking away feels like conceding. The staring contest, which is just this ancient dominance negotiation ritual dressed up as a children's game. Even in negotiations and sales contexts, research has shown that maintaining eye contact influences perceptions of authority, trustworthiness, and social power. But here's the crucial twist that makes human eye contact so different from what other animals do. In humans, sustained eye contact in non-competitive contexts of safety, warmth, romantic interest, or deep friendship, doesn't signal dominance. It signals intimacy. It signals, I see you, and I am choosing to be seen by you, and in this moment I am not evaluating you as a threat or a competitor, but as someone I want to be connected to. That shift, from threat to invitation, from challenge to connection, from dominance to intimacy, is one of the most remarkable things the human social brain learned to do, and it is why the same act, holding someone's gaze, can mean completely opposite things depending on context, relationship, and emotional tone. The intensity is the same. What it means changes everything. Eyes as windows, the ancient intuition. There is a reason that in virtually every culture on Earth, across every language and tradition and historical period, the eyes are described as the window to the soul, or some close equivalent. This intuition, that the eyes reveal the inner life in a way that nothing else does, is not just poetry. It is ancient wisdom about something that turns out to be neurologically real. The eyes are the only part of the brain that is directly visible from outside the body. Read that again, because it's genuinely extraordinary. The retina, the light-sensitive tissue at the back of your eye, is actually brain tissue. It is an outgrowth of the central nervous system. When you look into someone's eyes, you are, in the most literal possible sense, looking at their brain. You are looking at a piece of their nervous system. This is not something our ancestors consciously knew, but evolution doesn't need conscious knowledge. Evolution works through fitness, through what works and what doesn't. And over hundreds of thousands of years of human social evolution, the individuals who were best at reading information from the eyes of others, who were most sensitive to the tiny movements of the iris, the shifts of pupil size, the micro-expressions that flash across the face and originate in the eyes, those individuals had a social and reproductive advantage. They could tell when someone was lying. They could detect genuine versus performed emotion. They could identify trustworthy allies. They could recognize sexual interest. They could navigate the complex social landscape of human group life more effectively. And so that sensitivity, that extraordinary human ability to extract information from the eyes of others, was selected for and sharpened over generations. The result is us. Social animals with an almost preternatural sensitivity to gaze, whose brains have dedicated regions for processing eye direction, whose bodies release bonding hormones in response to sustained mutual gaze, and who feel, in the presence of meaningful eye contact, something that seems to transcend ordinary experience. We didn't learn that the eyes were important. We evolved to know it, the psychology of attraction. How eye contact creates desire. The Rubin Studies, 4 minutes that changed everything. In the 1970s, psychologist Zick Rubin conducted a fascinating series of studies examining the relationship between eye contact and romantic love. Rubin had already developed what he called a love scale, a set of questionnaires designed to measure the depth of romantic feeling between couples. And when he looked at the data from these questionnaires alongside behavioral observations, he found something remarkable. Couples who scored highest on his love scale spent significantly more time looking into each other's eyes during conversation than couples who scored lower. This wasn't just about looking at each other's faces. It was specifically about mutual gaze, about the direct meeting of eyes. The amount of eye contact exchanged between two people, Rubin found, was one of the most reliable behavioral indicators of romantic involvement. Not what they said, not how close they stood, not whether they touched. The eyes. This work was extended and expanded by later researchers, and it led to one of the most famous and most replicable findings in the psychology of attraction. Sustained mutual eye contact creates feelings of romantic love. Or at the very least, it creates the feelings that are so similar to romantic love that, functionally, they might as well be the same thing. The most dramatic demonstration of this came from the work of psychologist Arthur Aron and his colleagues, who in the 1990s developed what became known as the Fast Friends procedure, a series of increasingly personal questions designed to create feelings of closeness between strangers. The full Aron procedure ends with 4 minutes of sustained, silent, mutual eye contact. The results were remarkable. Pairs of strangers who went through the procedure reported feeling significantly closer to each other, including, in some cases, feelings of intense romantic attraction than control pairs who spent the same amount of time in conventional small talk. Several pairs who met in the context of these studies later began dating. At least one couple eventually got married. 4 minutes of eye contact. That's all it took to begin generating feelings that people associate with deep connection and romantic love. This finding has been replicated and extended in various forms since then, and every time the conclusion is essentially the same. Eye contact is not just a signal of attraction, it is a creator of attraction. When two people hold each other's gaze for long enough, something happens between them, something shifts. The experience of being fully seen, of having another person's complete visual attention, does something to us that runs deeper than any rational understanding of the situation. The mere exposure effect and the gaze. To understand one of the mechanisms by which sustained eye contact creates attraction, we need to talk about a psychological principle called the mere exposure effect. The mere exposure effect is one of the most robust findings in all of social psychology. The basic phenomenon is this: the more we are exposed to something, the more we tend to like it. Familiarity breeds fondness, not contempt. When we encounter something repeatedly, a piece of music, a face, a word in an unfamiliar language, a product design, our liking for it increases simply as a function of repeated exposure, even without any positive experience or reward associated with it. This effect has been demonstrated with faces specifically. People rate photographs of faces they've seen before as more attractive, more trustworthy, and more likable than photographs of equally attractive faces they haven't seen before. The familiar faces feel better, even when the person can't consciously identify that they've seen them before. Now apply this to the experience of sustained eye contact. When you hold someone's gaze, their face is not just being perceived, it is being studied. Your brain is receiving an unusually sustained, unusually attentive input of their face, their eyes, their expression. You are encoding them more deeply than you would in a passing glance. And through the mere exposure effect, this extended perception is already beginning to generate familiarity. And through familiarity, the early stirrings of positive feeling. But there's more. Sustained eye contact does not just create familiarity through exposure. It also creates something psychologists call shared attention, the experience of two minds directing themselves at the same thing, in this case, each other. And shared attention has its own powerful social consequences. When we engage in shared attention with someone, when we look at the same thing together, point at the same object, laugh at the same joke, or hold each other's gaze, our brains register this as a form of alignment. We are with this person in a way that is more fundamental than proximity. We are with them in attention, in awareness, in the most basic act of conscious experience, looking. This experience of shared attention, of aligned awareness feels good. It feels connecting. It feels intimate. And it contributes to the magnetic quality of sustained mutual gaze in a way that, once you understand it, seems almost obvious in retrospect. The spotlight effect and being seen. Here's a paradox that lies at the heart of the experience of meaningful eye contact, and it's one that most discussions of this topic completely miss. Most of us, most of the time, feel somewhat invisible, not in a dramatic or clinical sense, not the invisibility of depression or social anxiety, but in the ordinary, everyday sense of moving through the world without feeling particularly noticed. We are surrounded by other people, but we are rarely the focus of their sustained, deliberate attention. We are background characters in most people's lives, and most people are background characters in ours. This is the normal condition of social existence, and most of the time we don't consciously notice it. But when someone looks at you, really looks at you, not past you or through you, but at you, with the kind of sustained, focused attention that says, "You are the most important thing in my perceptual world right now," you notice. You notice because it is different from your usual experience. You notice because your brain, which has been operating under the assumption of being generally unremarkable to other people, suddenly receives information that contradicts that assumption. Someone sees you. Not the social performance you've learned to project, not the version of you that navigates professional spaces or manages family obligations, but you, in this moment, face to face. There is a term in psychology, the spotlight effect, that refers to our tendency to overestimate how much other people notice us. We think we're more observed than we actually are. This creates a constant background anxiety about being judged, being seen in our imperfections, being watched and evaluated. Meaningful eye contact briefly inverts this. In that moment, the spotlight is real. Someone genuinely is watching. And in the context of attraction, when that watching is warm, curious, interested rather than critical, it feels not threatening, but wonderful. To be truly seen by someone who is glad to see you is one of the most powerful experiences available to a social animal, and the eyes are the primary vehicle through which that experience is delivered and received. This, I think, is one of the deepest reasons that intimate eye contact feels the way it does. It answers a need, the need to be seen, to be significant, to matter to at least one other consciousness in the vast indifference of the world that runs very, very deep in us. Attraction signals, the dance of looking and looking away. In the context of romantic attraction, eye contact is never just static. It is dynamic. It is choreographic. It follows patterns that are so universal across cultures that researchers believe they reflect deep biological programming rather than learned social convention. The standard sequence looks something like this. First, there is the initial glance. You see someone, you register them. Your eyes linger for a moment longer than strict necessity would require. Then you look away, sometimes deliberately, sometimes reflexively. If there's interest, the glance returns. And the person you're looking at, if they're also interested, returns your look. At this point, both people are engaged in what researchers call mutual gaze monitoring, tracking each other's gaze behavior while managing their own. This is where it gets exquisitely nuanced. Looking away, in this context, is not rejection. It's often the opposite. Looking away, particularly if it's accompanied by a small smile, or a particular downward cast of the eyes, or any number of other micro-signals, can be a very powerful signal of interest. An invitation to pursue, a display of the kind of social modesty that signals safety and approachability. The game of looking and looking away is, in a very real sense, a negotiation. Each participant is testing the waters, sending signals, reading responses, calibrating. And when both people's signals align, when both are looking, when both are looking away at similar moments, when the rhythm of mutual gaze begins to synchronize, something remarkable happens. The interaction begins to feel fated, not because it is fated, obviously, but because synchronized behavior, the experience of being in rhythm with another person, generates a powerful feeling of compatibility, of rightness, of connection. Psychologists call this behavioral synchrony, and it is one of the most reliable generators of social liking and romantic attraction that researchers have identified. And it almost always begins with the eyes. The role of context, why the same look feels different in different places. One of the most important things to understand about eye contact and attraction is that context is everything. The same duration of gaze, the same intensity, the same facial expression accompanying it. These can produce radically different emotional responses depending on the social context in which they occur. In a crowded subway car, prolonged eye contact from a stranger feels intrusive, uncomfortable, potentially threatening. In a romantic restaurant at the end of a good first date, the same duration of gaze feels intimate, connecting, electric. At a business meeting, sustained eye contact signals confidence and engagement. During an argument with a partner, it can feel aggressive or challenging. Why does context change the meaning of eye contact so dramatically? Because your brain doesn't just process the sensory data of someone's gaze in isolation, it processes it in relationship to everything else it knows about the situation. It is constantly asking, what does this mean, given where I am, who this person is, what our relationship is, what their expression looks like, what the social norms of this environment are? The amygdala, remember the brain's alarm system, is particularly sensitive to contextual information. When context is safe and the gaze is warm, the amygdala's initial activation is quickly modulated. The threat signal is reinterpreted as a connection signal. Oxytocin flows. The warmth in the chest follows. When context is uncertain or the environmental signals are wrong, the amygdala doesn't settle down. The gaze remains uncomfortable. The time-slowing, world-narrowing experience of meaningful eye contact doesn't emerge. Instead, there's just discomfort. This is why attraction researchers are always careful to note that the power of eye contact to create romantic feeling requires certain baseline conditions: voluntary participation, relatively equal social power, an environment that feels safe, and an absence of prior negative associations between the two people involved. When those conditions are met, eye contact is one of the most powerful tools of connection available to human beings. When they're not, it's something else entirely. Time, consciousness, and the gaze. Why time stops. The temporal distortion, your brain's experience of time. We began this discussion with that phenomenon at the heart of it all, the feeling that time slows down or stops during intense mutual eye contact. Now we have enough neurological and psychological context to really dig into what's happening there. First, let's establish something important. The experience of time is not like a clock. Your brain does not experience time as an objective, uniform flow of moments, all equivalent in duration. Your brain constructs time. It builds the experience of duration out of a combination of attentional processes, memory encoding, emotional arousal, and neural processing speed. And this means that under different conditions, time feels different. There is now substantial research on what psychologists call subjective time, how long things feel to last, as opposed to how long they actually last. And the factors that affect subjective time are remarkably consistent. Attentional narrowing affects time perception dramatically. When your attention becomes highly focused on a single thing, time dilates. The moment seems to stretch. Conversely, when you're distracted and your attention is scattered, time seems to compress. Things that took an hour feel like they took 20 minutes. Emotional arousal affects time perception. High emotional arousal, the kind that comes from fear, excitement, anticipation, or intense interpersonal connection, is consistently associated with the feeling that time is slowing down. Moments of high arousal are encoded more densely by the brain, with more neural resources devoted to them, and this richer encoding is partly what gives them their stretched, elongated feeling. Novelty affects time perception. Genuinely novel experiences, things you've never encountered before, situations that fall outside your existing patterns and expectations, are processed more slowly and carefully by the brain, which again contributes to the feeling that time is stretching. Present moment awareness, the degree to which your conscious attention is entirely in the current moment rather than in the past or future, affects time perception profoundly. When you are fully in the present, time feels more spacious. Now look at what happens during intense mutual eye contact with someone you find deeply attractive. Your attention narrows to an extraordinary degree. In that moment, nothing is more important to your brain than this person's face, their eyes, the signals they are sending. The room recedes not because it disappears, but because your attentional resources are almost entirely redirected to this single point. Your emotional arousal spikes, the amygdala fires, dopamine surges, your heart rate increases. The cocktail of neurochemical activation that accompanies intense interpersonal engagement is flooding your system. The experience is genuinely novel, not in the sense that you've never made eye contact before, but in the sense that this eye contact with this person in this moment is unlike any other specific moment you've had before. Your brain is processing it fresh, and your awareness is involuntarily entirely in the present. You are not thinking about yesterday or tomorrow. You cannot be. The intensity of the present demand too much of your attentional capacity. All of these factors, attentional narrowing, emotional arousal, novelty, present moment immersion, simultaneously push your subjective experience of time in the same direction. Dilation, stretching, slowing, time stops. Not literally, the clock on the wall keeps ticking at the same rate, but your experience of time, the only experience of time you have access to, genuinely changes. The neural binding problem. How your brain creates a single moment. There's another piece of the puzzle that's worth understanding because it illuminates something profound about why intense eye contact feels the way it does. Your brain is doing something remarkable every moment of your conscious experience. It is taking information from dozens of different sensory systems, vision, hearing, touch, proprioception, interoception, and more, that arrive at different times and at different rates. And it is binding all of this information together into what feels like a single, unified, simultaneous moment of experience. This is called the binding problem in neuroscience, and it's one of the deepest unsolved mysteries in the field. How does the brain take all of this temporally dispersed, spatially distributed neural activity and create the felt sense of a unified present moment? We don't have a complete answer, but we know that the process of binding, of creating unified conscious experience, takes time and neural resources, and we know that under different conditions, the binding process works differently. During intense, high-arousal emotional experiences, which, as we've established, is exactly what significant eye contact can be, there is evidence that the brain's binding process is altered. More neural resources are devoted to the moment. More information is captured and integrated. The moment is experienced as richer, more vivid, more present. This contributes to another aspect of the time-stopping experience, the sense that the moment is unusually dense, unusually real, unusually alive, not just stretched, but fuller, as if reality had suddenly increased its resolution. This is why people describe moments of intense eye contact, particularly in the context of attraction or love, in terms that sound almost mystical. The world fell away. Everything became very vivid. I felt more awake than I ever had. These descriptions are not just poetic, they are attempts to capture a genuinely altered state of consciousness, an alteration driven not by chemical intoxicants, but by the neurological effects of intense interpersonal engagement. The flow state connection. There's a concept in positive psychology called flow, a term coined by psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi to describe a state of complete absorption in an activity where the sense of self recedes, time seems to alter, and performance feels effortless and intrinsically rewarding. Flow states have been studied in musicians, athletes, artists, programmers, surgeons, and many other domains of high skill and focused activity. And the consistent features of flow states are intense focus, absorption in the present moment, loss of self-consciousness, altered time perception, and a deep sense of meaning and aliveness. What's fascinating, and what isn't often discussed, is that the experience of intense mutual eye contact with someone you feel deeply connected to shares many of the hallmarks of a flow state. The attentional absorption is there, the present moment immersion is there, the altered time perception is there. Even the loss of self-consciousness, that peculiar quality where you stop being aware of yourself as a social performer and simply are in the moment, is often reported in descriptions of intensely meaningful eye contact. This isn't just a coincidence of description. It may reflect something real about the underlying neural dynamics. Flow states are thought to involve a temporary reduction in activity in the default mode network, the brain network most associated with self-referential thinking, mind-wandering, and the construction of the narrative self. When the default mode network quiets, the incessant chatter of self-consciousness recedes, and what remains is something closer to pure present-moment experience. Intense social and emotional engagement, including the kind that can emerge from sustained mutual gaze, may produce a similar quieting of self-referential processing for similar reasons. When your entire attentional system is absorbed by what's happening here, now, between you and this other person, there's simply no cognitive bandwidth left over for the usual background noise of self-monitoring and self-commentary. You stop watching yourself. You are simply there. And that, in itself, is one of the rarest and most precious experiences a human being can have. The social architecture of gaze, rules, violations, and power. The unwritten rules of looking. Every human society has elaborate, largely unspoken rules about eye contact. These rules vary in their specific content across cultures. There are genuine differences between East Asian, Western, Middle Eastern, Latin American, and African cultural norms around gaze. But the existence of rules around eye contact appears to be universal. Why do we have rules about something so apparently simple as where people point their eyes? Because gaze is one of the most powerful social signals available to us, and powerful signals require governance. Left entirely unregulated, the intensity of eye contact, its capacity to activate, connect, challenge, and disturb, would make social life chaotic. In most Western cultures, the general norm for comfortable eye contact in conversation is somewhere around 60 to 70% of the time, enough to signal engagement and attentiveness, not so much as to feel threatening or staring. The pattern is typically one of looking while listening more than while talking, with periodic breaks that allow both people to process what's being said. Deviations from these norms in either direction carry social meaning. Too little eye contact reads as evasive, untrustworthy, disinterested, or socially anxious. We evolved to find sustained gaze reassuring in benign social contexts, and its absence feels unsettling in a way that's hard to articulate but easy to feel. When someone can't quite meet your eyes during conversation, some part of your brain files this under uncertain or concerning. Too much eye contact, more than the norm, sustained beyond the comfortable rhythm of natural conversation, reads as domineering, aggressive, potentially threatening, or in different contexts, intensely intimate. It breaks the social rules that make ordinary interaction comfortable, and in doing so, it forces a response. You cannot be neutral in the face of someone who won't stop looking at you. The existence and enforcement of these norms tells us something important. Sustained eye contact is too powerful to be allowed in unlimited doses in everyday social interaction. It has to be rationed, controlled, governed by social agreement. Because when those controls are removed, what lies beneath is something quite profound. The intimacy equilibrium, distance, gaze, and comfort. Psychologist Michael Argyll, one of the pioneering researchers in the study of gaze and social interaction, developed what he called the intimacy equilibrium theory in the 1960s and 1970s. The basic idea is elegant. Every interaction has a certain level of intimacy that is comfortable for the participants, and they maintain this level through a balance of different channels: physical proximity, eye contact, touch, topic of conversation, and other signals. If one channel increases, say, physical distance decreases, another channel must decrease, say, eye contact reduces, to maintain the overall intimacy at a comfortable level. This explains a pattern you've probably noticed but never had a name for. When someone stands very close to you, uncomfortably close, you often find yourself averting your gaze. When someone maintains sustained eye contact, you might find yourself leaning back slightly, or changing the topic to something less personal, or injecting a joke to lighten the mood. These are not conscious calculations. They happen automatically as your social brain continuously monitors and adjusts the intimacy level of the interaction. This also explains what happens when someone allows the intimacy equilibrium to shift upward, when someone moves closer and holds your gaze, when physical proximity and sustained eye contact occur together. The combined intimacy signal is multiplicative rather than additive. The message your brain receives is not just, "This person is close to me," or "This person is looking at me," but "This person is making a move toward deep connection," and the emotional response is correspondingly more intense. This is why in romantic attraction, when the eye contact holds and the physical distance narrows simultaneously, the experience can feel almost overwhelming. Not because either signal alone is overwhelming, but because together they push the intimacy equilibrium past the ordinary, comfortable range into territory that is unfamiliar, exciting, and charged with significance. Power, status, and the eyes. We can't talk about the social architecture of gaze without spending some time on power. Eye contact and social power are deeply intertwined. Research across many cultures and contexts shows consistent patterns. Higher status individuals tend to look more at lower status individuals while speaking and less while listening. Lower status individuals tend to look more while listening and less while speaking. This is such a consistent pattern that researchers developed a measure called the visual dominance ratio, the ratio of looking while speaking to looking while listening, as an index of social power in a given interaction. In situations where power is ambiguous, two strangers meeting for the first time, a negotiation between equals, the early stages of a competitive relationship, who holds the gaze and who looks away becomes a micro-negotiation of status, and both parties are often acutely aware of it, even if they couldn't articulate what they're doing. In cross-cultural research, this pattern is complicated but robust. The specific norms vary. In some cultures, looking at an authority figure directly is more disrespectful than deferential. But the fundamental connection between gaze and power is consistent across a wide range of human societies. What does this have to do with attraction? In romantic attraction, particularly in its early stages, there's a fascinating interplay between the power dynamics of gaze, and the vulnerability dynamics of attraction. Being attracted to someone requires a degree of openness, a willingness to be seen wanting something. This is inherently a kind of social exposure. You are, in the act of attraction, making yourself somewhat vulnerable to rejection. Eye contact is the primary way that this exposure happens and is managed. The person who initiates sustained eye contact is taking a social risk. They are saying, in effect, "I see you, and I want you to see that I see you." If the other person meets the gaze and holds it, the risk is validated. It was worth taking. If the other person looks away quickly and doesn't return, the signal is clear. The courage required to hold someone's gaze when attraction is present, to not look away first, to offer yourself to being seen, is not a small thing. It's why sustained eye contact in the context of romantic interest feels so significant. It is, in a very real sense, an act of vulnerability, a moment of choosing to be seen. And being seen, being truly seen, is at once the thing we want most and the thing we fear most. Cultural variations and universal truths. How different cultures read the eyes. Before we go further in celebrating the universal power of eye contact, it's important to acknowledge the genuine cultural variation that exists in how gaze is understood and practiced across human societies. In many Northern European and North American contexts, particularly those influenced by Protestant and Enlightenment cultural traditions, direct eye contact is strongly valued as a sign of honesty, respect, and engagement. "Look me in the eye when you're talking to me" is a common parental instruction in these cultures, encoding the belief that averted gaze signals dishonesty or disrespect. In many East Asian cultural contexts, particularly in Japan and parts of China and Korea, sustained direct eye contact, especially with someone of higher status, can be read as disrespectful, aggressive, or overly forward. The social norm is often to soften gaze in the presence of authority and to manage eye contact more carefully as a matter of social deference. In some indigenous cultures, particularly certain groups in North America, prolonged direct eye contact with elders or authority figures is considered rude, and averting the gaze is a sign of respect rather than disrespect. In many Middle Eastern cultures, particularly in conversations between men, extended eye contact is a sign of trust and sincerity. But in mixed gender interactions, the rules are much more complex and governed by modesty norms. These differences are real, and they matter enormously in cross-cultural interactions. Misreading gaze norms can lead to profoundly wrong conclusions. A Japanese student correctly averting their gaze before an authority figure being read by an American teacher as evasive and untrustworthy, for example, or an American student's direct gaze being experienced as challenging by a teacher from a culture where such directness is inappropriate. However, and this is important, these cultural differences are variations on a universal theme, not wholesale different systems. In every culture, eye contact carries meaning. In every culture, the direction and duration of gaze are socially significant. In every culture, there are rules about how and when to look. The specific content of those rules varies. The importance of gaze in social life does not. And in every culture, when two people who find each other attractive are together in private, the negotiation of eye contact plays a central role in the dance of connection. The universal and the culturally particular coexist here, as they do in so many aspects of human social life. Gaze across development, from infancy to old age. One of the most powerful pieces of evidence for the deep biological roots of the gaze's social significance comes from developmental psychology. Infants within hours of birth, sometimes within minutes, show a specific preference for looking at human faces, and among facial features, they show a particular sensitivity to the direction of gaze. Even in the first days of life, newborns look longer at a face that is looking at them than at one that is looking away. This is not learned behavior. A newborn who has had, at most, hours of experience with the world is already attuned to the social significance of direct gaze. The neural machinery for detecting and responding to eye contact is active from the very beginning. By around 6 to 8 weeks of age, the social smile emerges, and it is triggered specifically by eye contact. A caregiver's face is not enough by itself. It's the direct gaze, the mutual looking, that consistently triggers the smile. This is thought to be an evolved attachment behavior, a mechanism by which infants elicit caregiving and build the emotional bond with their primary caregivers that is essential for survival. The bond between parent and infant is, in a very real sense, built through eye contact. Hours upon hours of mutual gaze, of looking and being looked at, of the responsiveness and attunement that comes from seeing and being seen. Isn't it remarkable that the foundation of the first human bond, the bond between parent and infant, and the experience of falling in love, both involve the same fundamental act, the sustained, mutual meeting of eyes? As we move through childhood and adolescence, the social functions of eye contact expand and become more complex. Children learn the social rules of their culture around gaze. They develop sensitivity to the social meaning of different types of eye contact. The difference between someone staring at them angrily and looking at them warmly. The difference between someone's gaze of admiration and someone's gaze of evaluation. In adolescence, with the emergence of romantic interest, the whole charged dimension of attraction and gaze suddenly becomes relevant. The excruciating self-consciousness of that first eye contact with a crush, wondering if they'll look, if they noticed you looking, what it meant when they did look, is one of the most universal experiences of adolescent social life across every culture. And in old age, research suggests that the importance of meaningful eye contact doesn't diminish. In studies of elderly couples, mutual gaze remains one of the most reliable behavioral markers of relationship quality. The eyes continue to do their ancient work, connecting, signaling, binding. From birth to death, across the entire arc of human experience, the gaze matters. The dark side, when eye contact goes wrong. Social anxiety and the unbearable weight of being seen. For all that we've said about the power of eye contact to create connection, warmth, and the beautiful experience of being seen, we need to acknowledge something important. For many people, eye contact is not pleasurable, it is painful. Social anxiety disorder, which affects a substantial portion of the population and is one of the most common mental health conditions worldwide, is characterized, among other things, by a profound aversion to being looked at. People with social anxiety often find direct eye contact triggering. It activates exactly the kind of intense amygdala response we've been discussing. But without the oxytocin counterbalance, without the reframing from threat to connection, the alarm system fires and it doesn't quiet. This is partly because social anxiety is characterized by hypervigilance to social evaluation. People with social anxiety are acutely aware of being observed, and that awareness is associated with fear of negative judgment. The spotlight effect, the sense of being watched and evaluated, which is enjoyable in the context of positive attraction, becomes terrifying when the expected outcome of being seen is judgment, rejection, or humiliation. Eye contact is, as we've established, the most direct experience of being seen by another consciousness. For someone whose relationship with being seen is dominated by fear rather than desire, the meeting of eyes is not a gateway to connection. It's an exposure to the thing they most dread. Understanding this neurologically actually offers something more useful than simply telling someone with social anxiety to just look people in the eye. The challenge for people with social anxiety is not a lack of knowledge about the social importance of eye contact. It's that their nervous system has learned, often through real experiences of social rejection or humiliation, to associate the gaze of others with threat rather than connection. Therapeutic approaches that work with this that gently and gradually help the nervous system learn a different association, that allow the oxytocin response to develop and modulate the amygdala's alarm, can be genuinely transformative. The architecture of the response is the same in everyone. What differs is what the architecture has been conditioned to expect. Autism and the unique challenge of gaze. The experience of eye contact in autism spectrum conditions deserves specific attention because it illustrates something important about the range of human experience and the complexity of what we've been discussing. Many autistic individuals report that direct eye contact is not just socially challenging, but genuinely uncomfortable or even painful. Research using eye-tracking technology has confirmed that autistic individuals on average look at the eye region of faces significantly less than neurotypical individuals, and that this difference appears from a very young age. For a long time, this was described primarily as a deficit, something missing in autistic social processing, and the therapeutic emphasis was often on teaching autistic individuals to make more eye contact, to approximate neurotypical gaze norms. More recently, the conversation has shifted, partly driven by the advocacy of autistic people themselves, toward understanding this as a difference rather than purely a deficit. Many autistic individuals report that forcing themselves to make eye contact is extremely cognitively demanding, that it actually reduces their ability to process what someone is saying because so much cognitive resource is absorbed by managing the eye contact. This tells us something fascinating about eye contact and cognitive processing. For most neurotypical people, eye contact enhances processing of social information. The visual data of the face augments the auditory data of speech, and the two work together. But for many autistic individuals, the intense activation produced by direct gaze is more disruptive than augmenting. It competes with rather than supports other forms of social processing. This doesn't mean autistic individuals don't experience connection, or don't want it, or can't form deep and meaningful relationships. It means that for them, the gateway to connection may not run through direct eye contact in the same way. The lesson for all of us: the experience of eye contact is not identical across all human nervous systems, and understanding and respecting those differences is part of what it means to be genuinely attuned to another person. The unwanted gaze, when looking becomes threatening. We've talked about eye contact as a tool of connection and attraction, but the uncomfortable truth is that eye contact can also be threatening, intrusive, and violating. The same sustained gaze that, in the context of mutual romantic interest, feels electric and connective, feels deeply threatening and invasive in a context of unwanted attention. The difference between an appreciated look and a threatening stare is not fundamentally in the duration or the intensity of the gaze. It's in the context, the relationship, the consent, and the power dynamics. Research on unwanted gaze, on staring, on the experience of being watched without permission or welcome, consistently shows that it generates significant psychological distress. The amygdala that fires in response to direct gaze fires whether the gaze is wanted or not. But when it fires in the context of threat or unwelcomeness, there's no oxytocin to modulate it, no attraction narrative to reframe it. There's just the alarm, sustained and unmodulated. This is why public harassment, including the kind that involves persistent, unwanted staring, is not just rude or uncomfortable, but genuinely distressing at a neurological level. It activates the same threat response systems as physical intimidation. The body's alarm is real, even when the threat isn't physical. Understanding this should inform how we think about eye contact in public spaces, in professional environments, and in any context where the welcome nature of our attention isn't clear. The power of gaze to affect another person is real, regardless of our intention in looking. Putting it all together, what to do with all of this? The practice of presence, how to actually be seen and see. All of this science and evolutionary history and psychological architecture is fascinating. But what does it mean for how you actually live, how you actually connect with other people, how you actually experience and navigate attraction? Let me try to pull it together into something practical. First, the capacity for meaningful eye contact, the kind that creates real connection, is fundamentally a capacity for presence, for being genuinely, entirely here, in this moment, with this person. This is harder than it sounds in a world engineered for distraction. The constant availability of screens, the perpetual demands of notifications and updates, the trained reflex to reach for the phone in any moment of social pause, all of this actively works against the quality of presence that meaningful eye contact requires. But the neurological machinery is still there. The capacity is still there. The need is still there. When you give someone your genuinely undivided attention, when you are fully present to them, looking at them without the half attention that screens and distractions steal, they feel it. They feel it in the way that the social brain of a human being is wired to feel it, in the way that oxytocin and dopamine and the activation of the reward system make themselves felt. They feel more connected to you, more seen, more real, and so do you. Presence is a gift, and the eyes are its primary vehicle. And it's a gift that doesn't require exceptional social skill or charisma or good looks or wealth or any of the things we typically think of as the resources of attraction. It requires attention, and attention, while increasingly rare, is still something every one of us has the capacity to give. Vulnerability and the decision to hold. There's a moment in the experience of meaningful eye contact where a choice happens. Often it's not conscious, but it's real. It's the moment when you could look away, when looking away would be the comfortable, normal, self-protective thing to do. And you don't. You hold. You stay with the gaze, with the intensity, with the exposure of being seen. This moment, this choice to hold, is fundamentally a choice for vulnerability, a choice to say in the wordless language of gaze, I am here, I see you, I am willing to let you see me. The researcher Brené Brown has written and spoken extensively about vulnerability as the foundation of genuine human connection. And while her work is primarily focused on the larger scale of emotional honesty and authentic self-disclosure, the principle applies perfectly to this micro moment of the held gaze. Connection, real connection, not the managed performance-level connection of social ease, requires the willingness to be seen, and the eyes are where that willingness is first expressed and first tested. This is why the held gaze feels momentous when it happens, because on some level both people know that something real is being risked, and something real is being offered. The choice to hold the gaze is the choice to step out of the comfortable social performance into something more genuine, more exposed, more alive. And the person who meets that held gaze and holds it in return is saying, in the same wordless language, I accept. I see you seeing me. I am here too. Is it any wonder that time stops? Eye contact in long-term relationships, the forgotten practice. One of the saddest things that can happen in a long-term relationship, and it happens in many, perhaps most of them, is the gradual erosion of meaningful eye contact. In the early stages of romantic love, couples gaze at each other constantly. The research consistently shows elevated mutual gaze in the early relationship period, what researchers call the limerent phase, when romantic feeling is at its most intense. Couples in this stage look at each other with the kind of sustained, deeply attentive gaze that characterizes intense attraction. Over time, as the relationship matures and becomes comfortable, the gaze typically shifts. Couples spend less time looking at each other directly. Conversations happen side by side rather than face to face. Shared activities replace shared looking. The intensity of early romantic attention is replaced by the comfortable familiarity of established relationship. This shift is not necessarily a sign that anything is wrong. Comfortable familiarity is itself a form of love, and the constant high arousal intensity of the early phase is not sustainable or necessarily desirable indefinitely. But when the shift goes too far, when two people who love each other stop really seeing each other, stop genuinely looking, stop offering and receiving the wordless gift of sustained, present, attentive gaze, something important is lost. The research by John Gottman and colleagues on relationship satisfaction and longevity has identified what they call the turning toward response, the tendency to respond to a partner's bids for connection with genuine engagement rather than distraction or dismissal. Meaningful eye contact is, in a very real sense, one of the most fundamental turning toward behaviors available to partners. When couples deliberately reintroduce the practice of sustained, present, genuine eye contact into their relationship, not the habitual, half-attentive looks of daily life, but the really seeing kind, the effects on relationship satisfaction are often striking. The neurochemistry does not change with relationship length. The oxytocin still flows. The dopamine still signals reward. The felt experience of being genuinely seen by someone who loves you remains one of the most powerful emotional experiences available to us, whether you've been together for 3 months or 30 years. The eyes can remember how to speak to each other. They just need the chance. Mindfulness, meditation, and the quality of gaze. There's a fascinating connection between the quality of eye contact and certain practices that have been developed across many cultures, specifically to cultivate presence and awareness. Mindfulness meditation, in its various forms, is fundamentally a practice of learning to be fully in the present moment, with undivided awareness, without the compulsive pull of mental commentary and distraction. And practitioners consistently report that one of the changes that comes with sustained meditation practice is a change in how they experience and offer attention to other people. The gaze of a deeply present, attentive person feels different from the gaze of someone whose attention is scattered. You can feel the difference. And it's not mysterious why. A person who is fully present is giving you something that is genuinely rare. Their complete, undivided, non-evaluative attention. And your nervous system, evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to be exquisitely sensitive to the quality of social attention you receive, registers this as something precious. Many contemplative traditions have specific practices around gaze as a tool of connection and spiritual development. The Tibetan practice of gazing meditation, various forms of eye contact practice in yoga traditions, the use of sustained mutual gaze in certain forms of therapeutic practice, all of these reflect an ancient intuitive understanding that the quality of the gaze matters and that cultivating the capacity for deep, present, attentive looking is worth the effort. You don't have to be a meditator to access this. But understanding that the quality of your attention, how present you actually are when you look at someone, is at the heart of what makes eye contact meaningful rather than merely mechanical, is genuinely useful. The eyes are not the point. Presence is the point. The eyes are just the most direct route to it. The bigger picture. What eye contact tells us about being human, the mirror and the window. Eye contact as self-discovery. Here's something that the science of eye contact quietly illuminates, and that deserves to be said explicitly. When you look into someone else's eyes and feel something profound, part of what you're feeling is a reflection of yourself. The other person's gaze does not just bring them into focus, it brings you into focus. The experience of being seen, genuinely seen, by another consciousness is also the experience of becoming more real to yourself, more present, more vivid. This is not just poetry. There's a substantial body of research in developmental psychology showing that self-awareness, the capacity to have a conception of oneself as a self, develops through the experience of being seen by another. Infants develop a sense of self partly through the feedback of being seen, being responded to, being mirrored by their caregivers. The other's gaze is not just information about the other, it's information about the self. This developmental dynamic continues in adult life in subtler form. How other people look at us shapes how we see ourselves. Being seen with warmth and regard by someone we respect or desire activates a more positive self-perception. Being looked at with contempt or dismissal diminishes us. The self is not a fixed internal thing that exists independent of social reflection. It is partly constituted through the ongoing experience of being seen, and sustained eye contact, the most intense, most direct form of social seeing available to us, is where this self-constituting function of social gaze is most powerfully felt. This is another reason that meaningful eye contact feels the way it does. Not just because of what it tells you about the other person, but because of what it shows you about yourself. In the mirror of someone else's eyes, you catch a glimpse of something, your own existence, your own significance, your own aliveness, that ordinary life rarely brings into focus. The technology challenge. Can screens replace eyes? We are living through a period of profound change in how human beings connect with each other. The rise of digital communication, texting, social media, video calls, dating apps, has created new channels for connection while fundamentally altering the role of direct, in-person eye contact. Video calls are interesting in this context because they seem to offer eye contact but actually don't. The camera in your laptop or phone is not in the same position as the face of the person you're talking to on the screen. To make genuine eye contact in a video call, to actually look into the other person's eyes, you would need to stare at the camera, not at their face. And staring at a camera while someone speaks to you feels bizarre and disconnecting, even though it theoretically produces the right optical illusion of eye contact from the other end. The result is that video calls, which have become a primary mode of connection for many people, are conducted in a state of perpetual near-miss eye contact. Everyone is looking at everyone's face, but no one is looking directly at anyone. The mutual gaze, the direct meeting of eyes that activates the superior temporal sulcus and the amygdala and the oxytocin system, is absent. This is thought to be one of the primary contributors to the phenomenon of Zoom fatigue, the particular exhaustion that comes from extended video calling. The social brain is working hard to process the faces and the voices and the social information, but it's not getting the full signal it needs. The eye contact is missing, and something feels off in a way that is difficult to articulate but deeply tiring. This doesn't mean technology is the enemy of human connection. Video calls are genuinely better than no visual contact at all, and the creativity of human beings in finding ways to connect across technological limitations is remarkable. But it does mean that the in-person meeting of eyes, the actual physical, no intermediary direct gaze, is something that cannot be fully replicated digitally. The neurological response to real eye contact, the neurochemistry it produces, the full sensory richness of being in someone's actual presence and looking into their actual eyes, these belong to embodied, physical, co-present human experience. And in a world where more and more connection happens through screens, this makes the in-person gaze more precious, not less. It makes the moments when two people are actually together, actually looking at each other, actually present to each other, more rare and therefore more significant. The final synthesis, what it all means. Let's come back to where we began. You're standing in a crowded room. Someone looks at you. Time seems to stop. You now know what's happening. In the first milliseconds, your superior temporal sulcus, the dedicated gaze detector in your temporal lobe, registers that direct eye contact has occurred. The signal bypasses your conscious mind and goes straight to the amygdala, which fires an alarm. Significant, important, pay attention. Simultaneously, Your pupil begins to dilate if you're attracted to this person, broadcasting a signal that the other person's brain will read without their conscious awareness. If the gaze holds, if you both choose not to look away, the oxytocin system begins to activate. The initial alarm signal starts to be modulated, reframed from threat to connection. Warmth moves through your chest. Your heartbeat, which spiked, finds a new rhythm. The dopamine system logs this as a reward. Your motivation system says, more of this. Stay here. This is good. Your attention narrows to an extraordinary degree, pulling neural resources away from everything else in the environment and directing them at this person, this face, these eyes. Your emotional arousal is elevated. The novelty of the specific moment, even if you've made eye contact 1,000 times before, you've never made this eye contact with this person, engages your processing systems freshly. Your default mode network, the self-monitoring, ruminating, narrative-constructing part of your mind, quiets. The chatter stops. You are simply here. All of these factors converge on the temporal experience. Time dilates, the moment stretches, the world recedes, not because it disappears, but because your attentional resources have redirected themselves entirely into this single, extraordinary focus. You are participating in something ancient, a form of communication that predates language by millions of years, a signal system that was woven into human social life because, for our ancestors, the ability to read another person's gaze, to know if they were friend or threat, ally or competitor, interested or indifferent, was not a matter of social comfort, but of survival. You are the latest heir of a long lineage of social animals who found each other, bonded with each other, loved each other, built everything that is worth building in human civilization together, largely through the act of looking at each other, of offering and receiving the full, undivided gift of attentive sight. Your white sclera broadcasts the direction of your gaze to the world because your species evolved to coordinate attention, to share the direction of looking, to be readable to each other in ways that no other animal is. Your eyes are the only visible part of your brain, the most ancient visible expression of your interior life, and when someone looks into them, and you look into theirs, you are participating in the most direct form of mind-to-mind contact available to embodied creatures. Time stops because what is happening is genuinely outside ordinary time. It is happening in the dimension of pure presence, of two nervous systems fully activated and directed at each other, of two ancient and sophisticated biological systems that evolved for exactly this, to find each other, to assess each other, to decide if something important might be beginning. And sometimes it is. Sometimes it is the beginning of something that will change your life. A friendship that will sustain you. A love that will teach you who you are. A conversation that will shift something fundamental in how you understand the world. It all starts with a look. The invitation. Here is what I want to leave you with. The science is extraordinary. The evolutionary history is remarkable. The neuroscience is genuinely illuminating, but none of the activation sequences and neurochemical cascades and subjective time dilation mechanisms, none of it captures the full weight of what is actually at stake when two people look at each other and hold the gaze. What is actually at stake is something that all of this science is pointing toward, but cannot contain: the profound human need to be seen, to be witnessed, to exist in the awareness of another consciousness, and to know that you are real, that you matter, that you are not alone in the universe. We are social animals whose greatest fear is isolation and whose deepest need is connection. And the eyes, those transparent, exposed, uniquely human windows to the only piece of brain visible from outside the body, are the primary instrument of that connection. Every time you hold someone's gaze, you are offering them something. You are saying, I see you. You are visible to me. You are significant enough to hold my full attention in this moment. And that gift, the gift of genuine, present, undivided attention, is one of the most profound things one human being can offer another. Every time you allow yourself to be seen, every time you don't look away, every time you hold the gaze even when it's vulnerable and uncomfortable, you are saying, "I am here. You can see me. I trust this enough to let it be real." We live in a world that increasingly offers us the option of half-presence, of connection light, of the managed distance of screens and performances, and the careful curation of what we allow others to see of us. In this world, the willingness to actually look, to really, fully, presently look, is becoming increasingly countercultural and increasingly precious. The next time someone looks at you and time slows down, the next time you feel that peculiar, ancient electric thing that happens when eyes meet eyes and hold, I hope you'll have a richer sense of what is happening, of the extraordinary biological and psychological and evolutionary machinery that is quietly activating, of how long and how deep the roots of that moment go. And I hope that understanding makes you more willing to hold the gaze, to offer the gift, to let yourself be seen. Because in the end, what we most want and what we are most afraid of is exactly the same thing. To be fully seen by someone who is glad to see us. That is what the eyes are for. That is why time stops. Research, highlights, and key concepts. A summary of the core science. For those who want a clear reference to the key research areas and concepts discussed throughout this script, here is a consolidated overview. The superior temporal sulcus, STS, a region of the temporal lobe specifically tuned to the direction of other people's gaze. It responds with greater activation to direct eye contact than to any other gaze direction, and this response begins within milliseconds of gaze contact being established. The amygdala and gaze. Functional MRI research has consistently demonstrated that direct eye contact activates the amygdala more strongly than averted gaze. This activation appears to occur through a subcortical fast pathway that bypasses initial cortical processing. Pupil dilation and attraction. Mutual attraction causes pupil dilation through autonomic nervous system activation. Research has demonstrated that people rate faces with dilated pupils as more attractive, often without conscious awareness of the pupil difference. Oxytocin and sustained gaze. Studies have linked sustained mutual eye contact with increased oxytocin levels in interacting individuals. Oxytocin facilitates trust, social bonding, and modulation of the amygdala's threat response. Dopamine and the reward of being seen. The experience of being the focus of another person's sustained positive gaze activates dopaminergic reward pathways, contributing to the pleasurable and addictive quality of meaningful eye contact. The cooperative eye hypothesis. The uniquely visible white sclera of human eyes is hypothesized to have evolved specifically to make gaze direction readable to other group members, facilitating coordination in a highly social species. Rubin's love studies. Pioneering research showing that the amount of mutual gaze between couples correlates reliably with scores on romantic love scales, suggesting that eye contact is a primary behavioral marker of romantic attachment. The Aron Fast Friends procedure. Experimental research showing that structured sustained eye contact between strangers can produce significant feelings of closeness, including romantic attraction, within a relatively short time period. Subjective time dilation. The psychological literature on subjective time consistently shows that high emotional arousal, attentional narrowing, novelty, and present moment immersion all contribute to the felt slowing of time, all of which occur during intense mutual eye contact. The visual dominance ratio, a measure of social power derived from gaze behavior, the ratio of looking while speaking to looking while listening. Higher status individuals tend to show higher visual dominance ratios. Intimacy equilibrium theory. The theory that interactions maintain a relatively stable level of intimacy through compensatory adjustments across multiple channels, proximity, gaze, touch, topic, explaining why changes in one channel produce responsive changes in others. Behavioral synchrony. The research finding that synchronized behavior, including synchronized gaze behavior, is one of the most reliable generators of social liking and romantic attraction. The binding problem and conscious experience. The neuroscientific puzzle of how the brain integrates temporally and spatially distributed neural activity into unified conscious experience, relevant to understanding why intense social moments feel unusually vivid and present. The mere exposure effect. The robust psychological finding that repeated exposure to a stimulus increases liking for it, contributing to the attraction-building properties of sustained mutual gaze. Default mode network and presence. Research suggesting that intense social engagement may quiet the default mode network, associated with self-referential thinking and mind-wandering, producing a state resembling flow and characterized by unusual present-moment vividness. The 7 key insights. If you take nothing else from everything we've discussed today, take these 7 things. 1. Eye contact is not just a social convention. It is one of the most ancient and powerful forms of communication available to social animals, rooted in evolutionary history that long predates human language. 2. The feeling that time slows down during intense mutual gaze is a real neurological phenomenon, produced by the confluence of attentional narrowing, emotional arousal, novelty processing, and present-moment immersion, not a romantic fantasy. 3. The eyes are literally visible brain tissue. Looking into someone's eyes is the closest thing to direct mind-to-mind contact available to embodied creatures. 4. Eye contact does not just signal attraction, it creates it. The neurochemical effects of sustained mutual gaze, oxytocin, dopamine, reduced amygdala threat response, produce genuine feelings of connection, warmth, and positive regard. 5. Cultural variations in eye contact norms are real and important, but they are variations on a universal theme. In every human society, gaze carries profound social meaning. 6. The quality of eye contact depends fundamentally on the quality of presence. How genuinely, fully, non-distractedly you are attending to another person. Presence can be cultivated and is the foundation of meaningful connection. 7. Being genuinely seen and genuinely seeing is one of the deepest Huberman needs. The willingness to offer it and receive it, even in the vulnerability of not looking away, is at the heart of what it means to connect. This script is intended for educational and reflective purposes. The science discussed reflects the state of psychological and neuroscientific research as understood in recent decades, presented in accessible terms for a general to BBI. 5. Toil. Individual experiences of eye contact, attraction, and connection will vary across people, cultures, neurotypes, and contexts. 88 du 88